Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome back to my channel. I've already shared my predictions for this year's Booker Prize longlist, which is my best guess at which 13 books I think we will see when the longlist is revealed in just over a week's time, and at which point we will probably learn that I've been completely wrong with my guesses. But lots of you mentioned in the comments that you'd also like to hear what my wish list for the 2025 prize would be. Not necessarily the books that I think will make it, but ones that I'd be really happy to see nominated. To be honest, there would be quite a bit of overlap between my actual predictions and my wish list, and I don't want to bore you repeating myself talking about the same books over and over again. So today I'm sharing a sort of wish list, a wish list-ish. I've got another 13 books to share with you, 7 of which I've read, 6 I haven't, and I'll explain my rationale and the reasons for including them as we go. I won't go through all the prize details and eligibility criteria again, but if you did want to know more about that for this year's prize, I've covered it all in detail in my predictions video, and I'll link that in the description if you're interested. So let's get right into it, starting with 3 books that I have read and loved and would just really like to see recognised by the prize. The first of those 3 is 3 Days in June by Anne Tyler, and Tyler has previously been shortlisted for the Booker. I think she could well make the long list again with this latest slip of a novel from her. This one is about a woman called Gail, and it's told across 3 days, before, during and after the wedding of her daughter. And she ends up having to spend those 3 days with her ex-husband, and I think it's just a beautiful book. I actually read this over 3 days in June when I went to a wedding, so I felt quite obligated to take this with me and read it across those 3 days. And what I hoped for was something comforting and life-affirming. And it is that, but it's also so much more, because it's also rather funny, and Gail is an absolute riot of a main character. I loved it, and I would be very happy to see it make the cut. The second book that I loved and am really rooting for is A Room Above a Shop by Anthony Shapland. I read and reviewed this one on my channel right at the start of the year when I did a vlog reading like 5 short books in 5 days. This is a very short debut novel, and it's set in the 1980s in a Welsh former mining village. In these short scenes and vignettes, it tells the story of 2 men, M and B, which coincidentally are mine and my husband's initials. So it felt a little bit more personal than it might to some other people. M and B meet in a local pub, and M offers B a job in his ironmongery shop and lodging in the room above it. And it's in this room above that shop that things between them develop. And it's just this beautiful account of the tentative steps and later full leaps they take towards one another. But they are living in a time when their feelings for someone of the same sex aren't acceptable in society, and the politics of the time around Section 28 and the AIDS crisis aren't front and centre of the story, but they do loom over it. I thought it was just an exquisite novel, and I would love to see it announced on that long list. My third pick is another debut novel, but this one is from an acclaimed short story writer, Wendy Erskine, and it's called The Benefactors. The novel takes its name from this online platform. Well, it's actually one of a few reasons for the novel's name, but one of them is that there is this platform called The Benefactors, or Bennies for short, which as a Ben, I'm not sure how I feel about, because this is a sort of paid companionship / escort / maybe sex stuff sort of thing. It's set in Northern Ireland, and the core of the story is about a teenage girl called Misty who has an account on Bennies, but completely unrelated to that, she has this horrible experience of sexual assault. And we follow the points of view of Misty, her stepdad, and the parents of 3 boys implicated in the assault. And in between the chapters of those main characters, there's this cacophony of other voices waxing on about their own lives and what they've heard about the assault. And I thought it was just brilliant. It is written with such an assured, authorial voice. It is so well written, so surprisingly funny, and it has a lot to say about gender and class and the very messy reality of living a normal human life in the internet age. I thought it was a fantastic book, even if I don't much like the cover, and desperately hope that they'll come up with something better for the paperback release. Okay, so next I have another 4 books that I have read and really liked, but the reason I would like to see them nominated is because because I think these are books that could come alive with more discussion. So I'd like to see them nominated so that more people read them, more people share their interpretations about them, and I think we collectively will all get a lot more out of them as a result. The first book that falls into this category for me is Universality by Natasha Brown. This is Brown's second novel, and just like her debut Assembly, it's a pretty short one. It opens with a piece in a very journalistic style, written like a long read you might get in The Guardian or The New York Times, about this shocking event where a man is bludgeoned with a golden doubloon, like this massive gold bar, and it investigates what happened from a number of different perspectives and angles. But then what follows are further perspectives that cast new light on what we've just read in that article. So we read the up-and-coming but struggling journalist who wrote it, the man who owned the gold bar, and this controversial op-ed writer whose son is accused of doing the bludgeoning. And what emerges are versions of the truth rather than one canonical account of what happened as we read it right at the start of the book. I've seen quite a mixed reception to this novel, but I thought it was just a really smart book, which is quite brave in how it asks questions about how and with whom we sympathise, and particularly in Britain today. While I would really love to see this on the list, I'm not sure that it will make it. And the reason is nothing to do with like the content of the book. It's just that Natasha Brown has recently been announced as the chair of judges for next year's International Booker Prize. And I think that might create a little bit of a conflict of interest. So there are examples where an International Booker judge has been a Booker nominee. Tan Tuan Eng was nominated a few years ago after being an International Booker judge in the same year. But by the time of his nomination, his judging duties were done and dusted. So it's not entirely out of the question that this could be on the list. I think that question just ends with like a very big, bold question mark. My next pick that deserves more discussion is Audition by Katie Kitamura. In this novel, we meet a woman who is a renowned actress as she turns up at a restaurant to have lunch with a younger man. And we don't know at first why she's there or what the nature of their relationship is. And I don't really want to explain anything more about that because I think it spoils it. But he basically makes a claim that is pretty much impossible. And we see that conversation play out and then what happens afterwards. And then about halfway through the novel, something changes, and as a reader you are left quite bewildered, but in a way that is a fun puzzle more than a frustration. If that sounds a little vague, then I'm sorry, but it is purposefully so, because I think it's worth going into this novel not knowing too much more about it than what I've just explained. I hadn't read any Katie Kitamura before, and I wasn't entirely sure what to expect, but what I found was just this beautiful, extremely precise prose. It's another book that's quite short, but it is very expansive with ideas, and not a word is wasted. Like, it's very, very tightly written. It's a really interesting novel at a sentence level, but also a structural level, and overall, I just really, really enjoyed it. And I want more people to read about it and talk about it. I have seen quite a few people sharing their theories about what happened in the plot, and I have to admit, I've been feeling like maybe I'm the dumb one because I thought it was pretty obvious what had happened, but I'd love to hear more people share their takes on it. My next choice here is Absence by Issa Quincy, and I'll be honest right up front that this is a book that I liked a little bit less than the other ones I've talked about so far, but I do think that it's one that could grow a lot for me with some discussion. So it's a bit harder to say what this is about in terms of plot rather than themes, but basically the narrator is a man who in each chapter recounts some story of an object, a place, a person, and often their death. And sometimes these stories are stories that he has been told sort of second-hand or even third-hand. This is another book that at a sentence level I think is absolutely stunning. Issa Quincy clearly knows how to write a sentence, and I found the first few chapters beautiful. Like, their construction felt so expert in the way that it might, for instance, start with him recalling a photograph, and then at the end of the chapter that photograph sort of comes back into the story in a really creative and satisfying way. And along the journey, it explores memory and grief and how we use our lives in what I think is just very beautiful prose. Over the course of the book, though, I think the sheen does wear off a little, and sometimes the themes become a little at odds with the form, because the narrator will be talking about the fallibility of memory, but then recount in perfect detail these stories that someone else has said to him. And I sadly lost a bit of interest. There's like a really long chapter in the middle that almost lost me, but then it came back around and I did enjoy the ending again. But it is a book that I think warrants some discussion because it's jam-packed full of ideas and reflections that I think a lot of people would love to talk about, and for that reason I think it would make an excellent addition to the long list. My final pick in this grouping, and actually the last book out of the ones I'm going to talk about today that I've actually read, is less of a puzzle to unpick, but more a book that I'd like to see discussed because of some of the interesting formal and stylistic choices that it makes, and that is Flesh by David Saloy. He is an author that has previously been shortlisted for the Booker, perhaps quite controversially because it was for a book of short stories and technically not eligible. Flesh is definitely a novel though, and it's about this Hungarian character called István who we meet as a teenager and then follow his ups and downs and ups again as he moves to England, gets a number of different jobs, encounters the wealthy and then becomes one of them. It's got this very interesting style. It's very simple and unadorned, quite emotionally stunted on the surface, and I think that could go either way with the judges. I personally really liked it, and I know lots of other people have too, and I wonder if it could be a good book to include for what it has to say about masculinity at a time when there's a bit of a crisis in masculinity and what it means to be a good man. This is one that lots of people have been predicting, and many of you mentioned in the comments on my predictions video, and I definitely would not be surprised nor unhappy if it was on the list. Right, we're moving on now to books that I haven't yet read, but I'm excited to get to, and my next three picks represent a much wider category that I think lots of us would like to see represented on the long list a little bit more prominently, and those are books from small presses. Now, if you have watched my predictions video, you'll know I use this sort of batshit crazy formula to figure out what I think the composition of the long list is going to look like, and what I've found is that more often than not, the long lists are dominated by a small number of big presses and big imprints, but there are so many small presses publishing really exciting fiction, and it would be great to see more of them on the long list. There are a huge number of eligible options, but my first pick comes from Blue Moose Press, who have had some success recently with The Accidental Immigrants by Joe Macmillan, which was a shortlistee for the Orwell Prize for Fiction. But the one I'm going to mention today is A Dream of White Horses by Paul Scratton. And this came to my attention because I saw a really good review for it in The Guardian. And it's about a main character called Ben, which is an excellent choice of name, if I may say so myself. And Ben travels from London to this German island to see his friend Pascal, who is living out the final days of his life. And along the way, he listens to these voice notes that Pascal has sent him, which go with a set of photographs, and it describes each photograph in series. And these photographs are pictures of every room that Pascal has ever lived in. And the clips tell the stories behind these photographs, piecing together Pascal's life. And I think it just sounds like a really interesting conceit for a book. I think books about journeys and reflection while you're on a journey are always really captivating. And also, I just think the cover is very pretty, which is very shallow of me, but hey, if it works, it works. Next, I have a book from Epoch Press, which is a name you might recognise because they published In Defence of the Act by F.E. Black, which was nominated for the Women's Prize last year. This year, I think they've got a shot at the Booker with The Language of Remembering by Patrick Holloway. And my bookmark is falling out there. I got this recently because I kept seeing praise for it, and particularly from Eric Carl Anderson, who featured it in his Booker predictions video. This is about an Irish man who returns home from Brazil to Ireland to care for his mother, who has early onset Alzheimer's. And as she deteriorates, she begins to speak more and more Irish and to reflect on her youth. And in their conversations, they have these past traumas that are uncovered, and the mother and son learn more about themselves and about each other. It sounds like it's going to be this desperately sad story. I can see this being highly emotional because Alzheimer's is just this very terrifying disease that once diagnosed just leads to like inevitable decline, and I think it's a really hard thing to grapple with, and it can be so poignant and sad and scary. And I've heard that it's captured very beautifully in this book. So I'm always keen on something that's going to tug at my heartstrings, and it sounds like this may well do the trick. Right, finally then, I've got a book from a small press called Le Fugitive, and I am a Le Fugitive subscriber, and in my Women's Prize predictions I did include another book from them called Gloss by Kyra Wilder. That is also eligible and could well make an appearance on the Booker long list, but I wanted to share a more recent release from them, which is To Rest Our Minds and Bodies by Harriet Armstrong. And I'll get the obvious out of the way first. That cover is diabolical, and it actually looks a lot nicer with the dust jacket taken off. But I will leave it on while I talk about the book because, you know, shelf recognition is quite important. Anyway, this is about a woman in the final year of her degree at some unnamed university, and she is struggling to find meaning and fulfillment in anything. But she has a few mundane run-ins with this post-grad student that give her a morsel of the meaning that she's seeking, and she ends up in this sort of weird wrestle with nihilism, and it's had some rave reviews. I saw one that called it the bell jar for Gen Z, and although I am not from Gen Z, that still makes me more excited to read it, so we shall see. Okay, so lots of people get really excited by Irish fiction, myself included. Ireland produces an astounding number of excellent authors, and as a result, really excellent books. And I see lots of people's Booker predictions lists lousy with Irish authors. However, I think another part of the English-speaking world that is very underrepresented is Scotland. And I think Scottish authors are also doing some really interesting things. And so my final group of 3 books are all ones that I'm excited to read from Scottish writers. The first of those is called Greater Sins by Gabrielle Griffiths, and this is a historical novel. It's set during the First World War, but it's in an isolated Scottish community where this perfectly preserved body is found in a peat bog. And after the body is found, there are secrets that emerge, strange events that start happening in the community, while the First World War is sort of playing out in the background at a distance. It's a book that is supposed to be dripping with folklore and mystery, and it sounds very strange and wonderful, and I would love an excuse to prioritise it sometime soon. My second Scottish pick is Nobody's Empire by Stuart Murdoch, and if you are of a certain age or into a certain type of music, you may recognise that name, and that's because Murdoch is the lead singer of the indie pop band Belle and Sebastian. This is his second book, but I think his first novel, and perhaps unsurprisingly centres on a music lover with dreams of being a recording artist. And it's about his diagnosis with ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, something that Murdoch himself has experience of. And in the book, he meets other sufferers of it, and they build a bit of community amongst themselves. I expect that the music and probably medical aspects of this book are going to be told with realism and authority. And I've never read a book about ME before, so it'd be really interesting to read an own voice's perspective of it. It is also nice that it's a book that is already out in paperback, because, you know, these long lists get announced and they're all in these very expensive hardback editions, and it can be quite hard to get your hands on them. So a few paperbacks in the mix would be quite nice, won't it? My final pick from North of the Border, and indeed my final book on this kind of sort of wish list, is Muckleflugger by Michael Pedersen. And Muckleflugger is the name of a real island off the coast of Scotland, which used to be the most northerly inhabited island of the British Isles. And on that island is a lighthouse built, perhaps surprisingly, by Robert Louis Stevenson's father and uncle. And on this imagined version of the island, we follow the father and son who keep the lighthouse when they welcome this young man visiting for academic purposes. The reason that I am so enthused about reading this book is because I saw Michael Pedersen in conversation with Stephen Fry at Hay Festival, and I just found him like such an invigorating personality. He spoke about this book and its messages of grief and hope and friendship with such passion and energy that I couldn't help but be swept along by him. And I do also wonder if stories of male friendship might seem quite important right now. It is also another one with an absolutely stunning cover, and there is a special edition with like hot pink sprayed edges, but I'm quite happy with this one. So those are my 13 wish list-ish those are my 13 wish list-ish picks. But before I finish, one specific question I got quite a lot in the comments on my predictions video was, what were the last 5 books that I left off my predictions? Because I mentioned how painful it was to cull them down from 18 to 13. So 3 of those books are ones that I spoke about in this video, which were 3 Days in June, A Room Above a Shop, and Flesh. And then there were 2 other books that were in the running until sort of the last minute, which were Our Evenings by Alan Hollinghurst and Great Black Hope by Rob Franklin, which I could have easily included in this wish list as well. I'm really excited to get to them. I just didn't, and I don't know why. That's just how the cookie crumbled. Yeah, so that's it. If you enjoyed this video, it would be great if you could hit like if you did like it. If you don't want to, that's fine. And if you are not subscribed but you'd like to see more from me, now is a great time to hit the subscribe button. But until next time, toodles.